Chapter 18. Chapter 18. Jack yawned into the car's windowpane. He had fallen asleep within seconds of his head hitting the pillow. Still, a couple of hours of nap time almost made it harder to stay awake at the moment. He needed, or at least wanted, more sleep. The feeling would pass once he was up and moving around. Sitting back down in the car was almost enough to send him right back to sleep. Luckily, his mother was sitting behind the wheel instead of him. She was wearing the same leather protective outfit as the night before. "Do I need a weapon too?" he asked as the car rolled to a stop at the light. The last rays of sunlight glittered over the distant mountains to their left, casting the area below in deep shadows. She flicked the hilt of the dagger on her thigh and glanced over at him. "Not if Chantel and I do our job properly. The two of you will be there for learning purposes only, not to get involved in the fighting." The wheels chirped as the light changed to green. He sat up straight and looked over at his mother, feeling the tense, oppressive air as she lost control of her emotions. It wasn't an effect of magic or anything supernatural. The tense feeling was a pure result of her anger. Straightening up, he thumbed the button for the window and let the cool evening air shock his mind awake. A minute later, they rolled up to the Lockachar house. John was sitting on a lawn chair in the middle of the driveway, waiting for them. He sidled up to the passenger window and leaned down to look through it. His tall, heavily muscled form, making the simple movement look more impressive than it was. "Eleanor, Jack," he began by way of greeting. "The girls should be almost ready. They, and by they, I mean Chantel, wanted me to wait out here and I quote stop that woman from stepping one filthy foot inside our house." He looked up towards the house and then inched even closer to the car. "Just between the three of us, there was a lot less cursing involved than I was expecting. Whatever the two of you have been doing the last few nights has really caused her to mellow out." "She hasn't told you." "I told her she could." Eleanor asked in surprise. "No offense, Elle, but I want nothing to do with the council or even the nobility and their actions. I had enough of that growing up and living with it until recently. I'm enjoying my distance while I can." His eyes flicked to Jack, sitting a few inches away from his face. "It isn't going to last as long as I had originally hoped at this point." Jack's mother shrugged, the words not affecting her. "You're the ones who moved here," she said glibly. He snorted and backed away, heading up to the front door of his house. "I meant to talk to you about your magic and control before we got here, but I guess that will need to wait until tomorrow now. Sit in the back with Kaitlyn. Chantel should be up here with me," she finished as both women walked out of the house. Obediently he climbed out, leaving the door open for Chantel, and hopped into the back seat, reaching over and opening the door for Kaitlyn as well. His mother smiled seeing his actions, pleased with what he had done. Kaitlyn smiled at him, dropping a bag onto the bench between them while her mother slipped into the passenger seat up front. "Thanks," she whispered. Both of the Lockachar women were dressed in clothes made for fighting, designed specifically with ease of movement and protection in mind. "Which area are we hitting tonight?" Chantel asked, buckling her seatbelt. "Same area as last night, south of Kiowa towards that small Elbert town. I know we cleaned out the nest there last night, but my gut tells me that we missed something," she explained, the car accelerating smoothly. Jack struggled not to ogle the blue-eyed, blonde-haired young woman sitting opposite him in the back. The dark, supple leather clothes clung to her form and incited thoughts that he struggled to control. Her clothes were well taken care of, but showed hints that led him to believe they had been worn before. Noticing his gaze, Kaitlyn looked down and smiled, a hint of barely visible red creeping into her cheeks. "It's called a dueling outfit," she explained, shifting uncomfortably. "They are required to be worn by council-led schools for duel practice." "What kind of high school did you go to before moving here again?" he queried. Had her old school been like the one in the books where the kids were forced to fight against each other under the guise of training? She noticed the odd expression and troubled look in his eyes, and guessed where his mind had gone. "It probably isn't exactly like what you are imagining, but also not entirely wrong either." "A what?" She clasped her hands together and looked out the window. "Duels are a great way to practice your control and speed in a relatively safe situation, one that at the same time is stressful. They are a major part of what allowed me to fool everyone for so long about the size of my well." Her fingers began twisting about in complex motions only she could make sense of. More than that though, They're great practice for what many of us will do at some point in our lives. They train us for what to do when we find ourselves in a situation much like the one we are in now. Jack saw his mother nodding along from the driver's seat. It isn't as common as it used to be. Back in the day, everyone fought the monsters. Now we have been at a superficial peace for so long that most will never need to seriously even think about facing them. Chantel turned around and faced them both. Neither of you will have that luxury, however. As the granddaughter of council members on both sides, Kaitlyn never had a choice. As a powerful generator and the son of a baron, you also suffer from a lack of choices in the matter. Both of you will be expected to face the beings that threaten humanity. Whether it will be on some battlefield or as overseers of a territory, like your mother, is up to you and the council. What about you? Have you served on the front line? Jack asked, seeing the way his mother reacted to her words. No, I was deemed unfit, she said quietly with a pointed look towards Eleanor. Because of whatever you did to Mom. He couldn't help but dig a little deeper, twisting the proverbial knife. Chantel glared at him but said nothing as she twisted around to face the road once more. Kaitlyn shook her head sadly, her shadowed gaze lingering on the back of her mother's head. Jack knew he had taken it a little too far and was quick to change the subject. So, what can we expect to see and do tonight? You will be doing nothing, his mother was quick to say. You are here to learn, not help. Once we have cleared out the nest, then you can look around the area if you want. Chantel nodded. Exactly. I'm tempted to make you wait in the car until we are done clearing it. Unfortunately, that would defeat the purpose of having you come along in the first place. Kaitlyn rolled her eyes, the car accelerating as they left the town behind. The last rays of sunlight were behind them as they headed east. Why did you need to wait until night to clear out the monsters? Jack leaned his head against the closed window, looking out at the passing fields. What do you mean? Eleanor asked, pressing on the brake as they neared the turnoff that would take them to the tiny town that was their destination. I think I asked this before, but why are we attacking them at night when they are awake, instead of during the day when they are asleep? We call them nightwalkers, Chantel supplied, not answering the main question. Since that is when most of them are awake. He had heard them use the term before, but it hadn't stuck around until that moment. To answer your actual question though, it is because it is easier to find them during the night. The dens they hide in and create can be almost impossible to find during the day when they are asleep. At night, they are active and usually have lookouts guarding their homes. Besides, there are other monsters that are active during the day. Ones that aren't necessarily dangerous to us at the moment. Eleanor flicked on the high beams and pressed the accelerator as they left civilization behind. There were miles to go still to reach their target. Aren't there any spells or something to locate these nests or dens? Kaitlyn spoke up, leaving him nodding at the question. Eleanor sighed. Yes, there are. They are a part of every baron's domain. However, I have ignored some of the requirements for them in recent years. When I tried to activate certain area spells the other day, I discovered that not all of them were in working condition. It is a simple matter to fix them, it just takes a small amount of time, which we don't have right now. In a week or two though, I'll have everything working properly again. Mom, Jack sighed. I know you care for us and want to keep us safe, but it really sounds like you should be focusing just a little more on your territory. Kaitlyn nodded, not feeling the need to say anything more on the matter. It's not entirely my fault, she protested, the car swerving briefly into the other lane as she jerked on the wheel. The condition of the territory when I first arrived was absolutely abysmal. I've been slowly fixing things since I took over years ago. Though I will admit, I have put some things off for longer than I should have. She finished quietly. The reason she couldn't spare the magical energy went unsaid. At least Jack would understand. Didn't the council give you any help when you took over the area? Chantel asked. No. Eleanor barked shortly. Certain pig-headed council members decided it wasn't needed, despite the official reports stating otherwise. She glared at the other woman, her eyes hinting at just who those members had been. They haven't even bothered to pay me since that first year either. Chantel shifted in her seat uncomfortably and didn't reply, instead remaining silent for the last few minutes of the drive. It was getting harder to see inside the ever-darkening interior of the car, but Jack could have sworn that he saw Kaitlyn look away from her mother in disgust. In the silence that followed, he could hear knuckles popping as his mother squeezed the steering wheel in a near-death grip. A minute later, the car slowed and came to a stop in the middle of the road. On the right side of the road was a small gas station and convenience store, while on the left was an old, dilapidated post office. Farther up he could see a larger building that had the look of a school of some sort. "This is it?" he asked when it became apparent they had arrived at their destination. "Yup, this is the town. The nests we found last night were behind the school, buried in the trees. Ever since we left last night, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that there are even more of them somewhere behind the store or around there." Eleanor turned the wheel and drove into the gravel parking lot and parked out of sight behind the store. "You want us to go into that?" Kaitlyn asked, looking hard at the line of trees that butted up to the gravel lot. It was a dense line with the thick, tall pine trees letting none of the failing light in. It was as dark an area as they had ever seen, and just thinking about walking into those depths was enough to trigger a sense of danger in them. "Don't worry, you'll be with us." Jack climbed out of the car as his mother shut off the engine and walked around the motionless vehicle, opening the door for each of them. "Thanks, dear," Eleanor said as he helped her out, her finger thumbing the trunk release before closing the door. Buried inside the trunk was a set of backpacks and powerful flashlights, next to a thick parka coat. "Why don't the two of you carry the bags?" Chantel spoke up, flicking on a flashlight and shining it towards the woods. "At least take your weapon first." Eleanor rolled her eyes and unzipped one of the bags. Inside was a small 9mm handgun that Jack had never seen before. She took it out and clipped the plastic holder to her belt. "We can't use these this close to the town or other people, since we need to remain as unnoticed as possible. They're for emergency use only," she finished explaining before handing the bag to her son. Jack picked up his flashlight and shined it across the line of trees nearby, joining Chantel's beam in illuminating the area. Kaitlyn picked up her own flashlight with one hand and held the backpack out to her mother with the other. How many people actually live in this hole of a town? She leaned back and studied the 4 buildings that occupied the main street, running through the pit stop of a map marker. Chantel took the flashlight and then shrugged on the parka, despite it being a fairly warm night. Eleanor made sure her daggers were ready before answering. "You saw that school across the road from the gas station?" She waited for a beat, the lack of light preventing her from seeing their nods. "Well, that was originally built as a high school years ago, and then the town went downhill, and they combined it with the elementary school. What you may not have noticed is that the entire back half of it has been missing since 2009, when there was a tornado that destroyed it. Until recently, the state didn't care enough to give them the funds to rebuild it, despite the years they have been petitioning for it." That doesn't answer the question, Mom. It just tells us how pathetic this place is." Jack swung the backpack into position and cinched it tight. "Oh well, I think the official number is around 230 people." Eleanor slammed the trunk closed, the car beeping as she passed the keys to Jack. "So, do they have the funds now?" Kaitlyn asked, holding back as the two moms headed for the thick woods. "Yeah, they are scheduled to begin rebuilding it next year sometime," Eleanor answered, before motioning them to be quiet and stepping into the dark void of the pine trees. The two teens shivered as Jack's mother gathered her magic and let it permeate the surrounding air. Holding it at the ready, cold seeped out and froze the ground at their feet and encrusted the bark. Jack brushed against a tree as they walked into the depths. The bark shattered and the tree listed to the side in frozen death. "What the?" he whispered to Kaitlyn, his eyes wide with shock. Kaitlyn stared back with equally shocked eyes. Eleanor wasn't even trying to destroy the trees or freeze their surroundings. It was caused by a minuscule amount of her power seeping out, and it was causing more damage than should have been possible. The thick coat her mother was wearing suddenly made sense. "Is that normal?" he asked, holding back from following them too closely. "Not even close," she answered in an awestruck voice. A heartbeat later, a noise different from the howl they had heard before echoed through the woods. They were tracking a different kind of monster than the weird, acidic wolfen monsters from the other day. Eleanor's hazel eyes glinted ice blue as she turned around to look at the two teens, an almost feral smile on her face. "They just woke up. Stay close and don't do anything to draw attention to yourselves." An audible sigh burst from Chantel, who stamped her feet and kept moving. Mom?" Kaitlyn burst out in a worried tone. She was seeing sides of her mother that she had never known existed before then. "It's fine, let's just hurry this up." Her voice held a defeated quality that had no place on the proud, slightly sadistic woman they knew. The chill in the air deepened, and the trees groaned, while dried branches and pine needles shattered underfoot. Hurrying forward, they moved deeper into the woods and to the nest buried within. Minutes later, and after enduring 3 more hair-raising calls, they stopped outside of a clearing. The beams of their flashlights lit the open space bright, revealing the entrance to an underground cave. Jack held back as his mom stepped outside the ring of trees and stomped. A wave of glistening ice exploded out from where her foot hit the ground, encasing the entrance and sealing it tight. A moment later, the clear block trembled, as the refracted light glinted off the claws of a monster hidden within. Chantel skated across the icy grass, the thin blades shattering in front of her feet. In her hands, a compressed orb of light formed, floating gently above them. With a grunt, she pushed the glowing sphere into the wall of ice, the refracting light pulling together to form powerful beams on the other side. The light pierced through the closest monster, before dissipating as the ice cracked from the pressure. "One down, a bunch more to go," Chantel yelled with more enthusiasm than she had shown the rest of the night. Eleanor stopped next to her, magic circulating through the air as they both withdrew their daggers. Jack and Kaitlyn held up their flashlights, so their mothers could hold a dagger in each hand. Carefully they slid down the slick ramp into the cave, ignoring the hole-ridden body that had been pushed to the side. The air was still, with a thick musk that contained undertones of burnt flesh. A long dark tunnel extended a few feet in front of them, before it opened up into a large, cavernous area.